The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, a group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I am geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont from HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. And we're here today with our Hawaiian Volcano Tracker, talking about Kilauea mostly, a little bit about Mauna Loa on Thursday, December 14th, 2023. How you doing, Dane? Happy holidays.
Doing good. Yeah, happy holidays to you. And our ASL interpreters are off tonight. Dano and Carrie, they will be back in a couple weeks, but when we come back from our break, which we'll be talking about the week after next. But yeah, I've been doing good, pretty busy, and trying to stay dry as well. We've been having a good amount of rainfall out here.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely can appreciate the ASL guys a little more when we don't have them here. So it's been great to have them this last few months here. So it's been awesome. And yeah, on my end, I've been attending online the American Geophysical Union meeting this past week, listening to lots of new information about Kilauea, Mauna Loa. I'll have to summarize all that for you guys at some future date once I kind of synthesize it all. And a lot of that will come out in Volcano Awareness Month as well. But some good info there. We'll try to integrate all that. And today we'll just catch up with what's happening in Kilauea, add a few new, maybe not new, but some other twists that we haven't quite focused on as much here. And our schedule, should we go over right now, Dane, since we're covering our admin? Yeah. So we'll plan to do one more live update next week, the 21st, and then take a week off afterwards. On the 28th, we'll plan to not have an update. unless, of course, Pele calls us to action, in which case we will jump in whenever she does. So that means that our we'll update this in next week Thursday, but so we'll go like 21st, then we'll skip to 28th, and what's the next day, Dane? Something. I'm not sure what day of the week that is there.
The 4th. Is that
so, yeah, so we'll be back. Well, yeah, on the 4th of January,
right
after that. So that is our presumed schedule, our planned schedule. We'll see if we can keep it or not. And really, the story has been that there's been a lot of the same on Kilauea, a lot of the same patterns, a lot of the same signals, some slight variations. We can talk about that.
Still rocking and rolling up there. Get earthquakes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Coming and going. Yeah. So should we just get into the summary?
Sounds good.
All right. So let's switch our view here and put up our summary. Make sure I got my cursor here too. All right. So this week's Hawaiian Volcano summary. On Kilauea, we've had earthquakes continuing in the southwest rift in that upper section, as well as that lower section, which is near the Pu'uko area, as it's known. Also, we've had maybe a slight increase, but continuing persistent earthquakes in this upper east rift connector area. This follows last week's earthquake of magnitude 5, which was down right over here. That likely facilitated movement of this block and has led to more of this adjustment happening in this V. That's the southwest rift connector, the east rift connector, and the Koaʻe Fault zone right in there that we've highlighted for several months now. On the south flank itself, continuing earthquakes, aftershock, and movement of that same area in result to the same forces of swelling of the volcano at the summit, propagating down the rift, likely into here too, although maybe like this, maybe both ways. And all of that pushing the south flank, continuing to move offshore there. As far as the earthquake rates and depths for the last month, the last week we've had one pulse last week Friday, and then one yesterday, which had slightly higher earthquakes per day counts. And you can see this is on this particular graph, the fifth one of these peaks. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it seemed to be happening about every week or so. And it seems like these correspond to swelling of the southwest rift area. You see inflation in that area, especially leading to these earthquakes. That adjustment then passes and it essentially recharges after that. And we'll go into some details of why that might be in our full update here. But for now, we can just summarize by showing the Sand Hill tilt meter, which is the station southwest of the caldera, which in the blue line shows the inflation from the Halema'uma'u source, which has been inflating over the last week with some small variations, small deflation inflations, as well as in the green line from that south of the caldera, southwest rift area as well. And that has been inflating a little extra, especially in the most recent days here. So what you can see is here is that buildup in inflation rate in that southwest rift area, led to earthquakes yesterday that would correspond to right around here. And following the earthquakes, we see a flattening out of that inflation signal. So that seems to be the feedback happening up there. The effects still propagate far down a rift. This is a Hilina Pali station. That's about 7 miles southwest. It is still moving to the south and to the east at decent rates. And if we look at the stations closer to the summit, this is the outlet station, which is right on the southwest edge of the caldera. And we'll focus on this top panel, which is the east-west signal. What's happened recently is that station has now reversed course and is now going back to the west. Whereas recently it has been moving east with every adjustment that it's taken. Now it's wiggling back to the west. That's the most unique and localized signal we see here this week as far as what's changing. So still pressurizing up at the summit area with some slight shift of the inflation center in the caldera area, but also down the southwest rift and presumably in an upper east rift area as well. That's the summary for Kilauea. Mauna Loa has been pretty quiet. Let's see here. They changed their pages, but here's a map of earthquakes for the past week under Mauna Loa. Very few, but notably, we do have a couple of these deep earthquakes still occurring at a slow rate. So they had actually scarcely occurred for about a month prior to last week. And now we have a small cluster, still very slow, but still ongoing apparently here. And that's the summary for this week. So Dane, we'll turn to Kilauea. Observations next. And I always like to have a live look into the USGS webcam here. This is on YouTube. Panning around, so you see quite a lot more of this sulfur, gypsum, other sulfate mineral buildup around the fume vents around here.
I expected it to be steamier, really, with how much has been raining down where I am. But it doesn't look to be all that, whiteout conditions, as we call it. But yeah, you can see what time is it? 5:14. So yeah, the sunset conditions starting to set in there. And we are looking across from the Jagger Museum across the caldera right now. You can see the sulfur banks over on the other side. That got exposed more 2018 when the caldera collapsed partially.
Yeah, right up in there. Yep.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, so there's still lots of magma underneath this whole cap. It's still degassing and emitting and making these deposits around here. The impact of the gas is still pretty localized. We'll look at that here shortly. But overall, pretty quiet on the surface. It was pretty rainy this morning up here, Dane, and it seemed to clear out and actually kind of patch the sun not too long ago.
Oh, wow.
But certainly wouldn't be surprising to see some robust steam over the next couple of days here. So one other thing I thought I'd throw in here sometimes when you look at this camera, and since it relates to our discussion of earthquakes and all that, I thought I'd throw in this picture of the Koaʻe, which is the white-tailed tropic bird. Often you see these birds flying around in a crater. That's the kind of observation you can make right now in Kilauea. Koaʻe, that's the name of that fault zone as well. So we've been talking about the Koaʻe Fault Zone because in those cliffs of the cracks of the fault are where these birds nest. So I just thought I'd throw a little extra in here since there's not a lot else happening on the surface. If you're watching that live camera and you see these birds flying around, this is what they are, the white-tailed tropic bird. Some of the other islands have more of the red-tailed ones. We're really Kilauea only white-tails. Pretty interesting. Go fish in the ocean. The Koaʻe there. So since there's not a whole lot else to see, we'll just talk about the gas a little bit. Today for the gas, we will turn to the National Park website as a proxy for a volcanic hazard summary. The VMAP, VOG mapping project, is switching servers, so their current VOG updates are offline at present. So in lieu of that, here we have sensors around a national park. Everything is in the green and a map view here. You can also click on the charts, and that tells you for all different locations across the park, and that includes all the way to Kahuku, southwest part of the island. Everything measured in SO2 and particulate matter is in green here. So all good. Maybe the rain helps with that, but we can move on from our volcanic hazards today and go into the earthquakes, which is where we'll spend more of our time today, since there is so many earthquakes to talk about. So, all right, let's start off with this wider view of the island for the past week. And note that there's earthquakes kind of all over in that regular pattern. I've sorted them here on the left by the largest magnitude over the past week. And the largest one in the last week was a 3.6, 2 miles west-southwest of Holualoa. That's this one right there. 8 miles down. This is one of those flex adjustment earthquakes similar to the one we saw under Volcano last week. There was a 4.5 or so. Right, so we got that one going on. That one happened at 21:21:20 timestamp on the 8th, and 21:22:20 was a 3.4 that occurred here on the southeast slope of Mauna Loa, referenced at a distance of 4 miles or 12 miles north of Pahala right here. And this is essentially that flank of Mauna Loa wanting to adjust. Right, so there was a HVO information statement put out by those because those earthquakes were fairly widely felt, especially since one in Kona gets a lot of extra eyeballs on an earthquake map. And because it happened so close together in sequence, there seemed like there might have been some issue with the earthquake populating on the map. And so they had to do some extra review to untangle them, perhaps. it might get a little trickier with stacked events. So we'll just put it that way. So in any case, they released a statement for these two fairly small earthquakes, 3.6 Hulualoa, and that one had no apparent impact on any of the volcanoes, Hualai, Mauna Loa, or Kilauea. Keeping in mind, Hualai is a volcano of concern if you're in Kailua Kona town. And approximately 1 minute later, 3.4 earthquake on the east side of Pahala. This earthquake was likely not related to the one near Hulualoa, as it occurred in a different structural section of the island. It too had no apparent impact on any of the nearby volcanoes. So that's the long and short of it. No big deal for the earthquakes. And if you recall this graph we showed you last week from the USGS, that 3.6 was one of these flexural earthquakes. So that would have been somewhere like in here, with more or less where that X is, within that pile below sea level of the island of Hawaii. And then one we saw on Mauna Loa would have been on one of these faults like this, like that one right there, the Kauiki, that's in between the Kilauea summit area and Mauna Loa summit area. So they fit right in. And of course, we still have these ones ongoing in the Southwest Rift, although I think I am leaning, towards the fact that we're not really breaking as much new rock in this exact manner, and I'll talk about that here in not too long. But first, I can share that there is a new image. This is bordering on our monitoring a little bit here, but they do relate a new image from the USGS showing unrest between November 11th and December 12th. So this goes back to just a couple of days ago. It includes earthquakes within that month period, which are still occurring in the Southwest Rift Connector area all through here, although less of them than the previous month. More of them down here in the Pu'uko area, just west of the Kamakaya Hills, and more of them in this East Rift Connector area right here. And that is in part because of this circle right over here, which is that magnitude 5 that we saw last week. And so that's how all that lines up there. As far as the INSAR, there is a center of uplift there, and the rings, I'm trying to kind of trace them. So maybe you can, if you haven't seen them yet, you can pick them out with your eyeball. Something like that. The outermost ring I can see might go something like that, and then it kind of gets a little funny in here. And so that's telling you the area that's actually getting uplifted. And notably, this is much wider than this area that's showing earthquakes, right? This is how it's been in this area for a while. And it was presumed even from the 2005 episode where a very similar thing occurred, that you had somewhat of a sill, and the sill is basically more of like a flat body, right? So a dike we think of as a blade of magma that's somewhat upright. It can be tilted, right? But if it's more flat, then it's considered a sill. It's still that blade of magma, but it's lying flat in a flatter subhorizontal orientation, as it's called. And in that case, it might be underlying much of this area over here, and it's only causing the rock to be breaking on this side over here, right? And why might that be? You have northwest of it, Mauna Loa. That area is fairly solid. What does move is Kauiki, which is the fault zone further up, where we just mentioned that 3.4 occurring. When was that? A few days ago, right? So it doesn't adjust quite right here, but further over, and where it does adjust is on this eastern southeastern side. Right. So just to compare this image to, that's not what I was trying to do. Compare this one to the one from last week. Here's the one from last month, where you see a whole lot more yellow right in there, a whole lot less yellow there and there, right? And you still see that same uplift zone right there. So that's last month's from October to November. And then now we have the one from November to December here, right? So you can compare those yourself. All right, so what I wanted to show you next is this little twist on things. So what I've pulled out here, and I'll show you where this comes from, is an exposed thrust fault zone, right? So it's not exactly the same as what we're talking about with our décollement here, but it's similarly a fault zone that has a flat bottom. The kind of direction of motion is a little bit different. But in this case, this is a limestone area of the Pyrenees, right, between France and Spain. And this is the Lara thrust fault zone. And they've actually have an exposure of what this fault looks like. It's been brought to the surface, carved out by valleys. And now you can see what it looks like now when it's not actually moving deep underground when it formed these features, right? So these are black and white, but what you're seeing here on the left is the actual center of the fault zone itself. And what happens here is all these white streaks are veins of calcite, which is essentially the same material as the limestone, but when it's dissolved in a hot fluid. So hot fluids are present in this area. The rock is under great stress, so it's cracking, and then the fluid is able to inject into these cracks. So other areas, like if you go just above this central zone, you see actually coherent rock. That's the black stuff with the cracks actually through it. But the actual place where the fault is moving the most, that's down here, is actually 100% cracks. So it's like a crack that injects with fluid, and then that essentially precipitates and forms that little bit of calcite vein. And then it happens again, and then again, and again, and again, and again. And so I show this to you guys to offer some insight to what it might look like at the bottom of the décollement, or these structures of the south flank that are actually moving down there. The rock is grinding, so it's basically breaking through all that weight. But as we know, the rift zones do have an effect, right? And so if we imagine that there is some kind of subhorizontal weakness there, perhaps connected, associated with the sill, and it's able to pressurize in such a manner as this, right, where you have enough pressure building to then cause injection, cracks, and then fluid into there, then that fluid could actually help lubricate the fault and aids movement in the same way that a hydraulic lift by injecting pressure can lift something really heavy. You're adding hydraulic pressure from the magma, putting it in this little wedge way down there, and then that actually can allow the fault to then move more. And when faults move, they create earthquakes, right? And they create earthquakes where this sticking zone actually happens. So it could well be that you have in our mysterious Southwest Rift, because it doesn't erupt that often and has lots of intrusions quite often as well, an interaction between this magma movement and the fault movement as well, right? So where you have that faults in place, magma may be moving through them, and if that's the case, it's only pressurizing and moving on one side towards the south, where it actually can move there to the south. And so that's the fascinating thing here to me. Yeah? That whole area could be injecting, moving this way, and then it actually just causing the fault to flare up, right, and just keep quaking. And that is why it starts and stops and starts and stops. Could be why it starts and stops, right? Because you're essentially using that hydraulic pressure. You move the block, and then it settles, and you have to re-pressurize it with the hydraulic pressure. So you build inflation. That leads to the earthquakes. Once the thing moves, the earthquakes stop, inflation stops also, and then it resumes at some point afterwards. It's one possible mechanism to think about there. And I always, because we have these faults everywhere, the magma is moving through, it certainly seems on a radar that you could have interaction of the magma and the faults in areas like this, right? So as an example of how this might happen and manifest in this area, in particular in the Southwest Rift, I've seen some references online to this era of the 1980s, and I thought we could talk about this a little bit as well. This is a graph that comes from professional paper 1806 USGS, where they detail all the activity of the volcano for as far back as we have data. So what I want to point to, this is a lot of stuff on here, so we're going to really focus it in here. We're going to look at this panel right here, which is the earthquakes per day, and these are split between the regions. So the regions here, the one we care about is the pink one, is seismic Southwest Rift, right? That's what we're activated right now. Also of note, these orangish ones, that's Koaʻe, right? What they note is that the solid symbols are bigger ones, and then the open symbols are smaller ones there, right? But here's the point. Here is the time scale. 1980 is over here. 1981 is here. 1982 is here. 1983 is here. So in this band right there, the pink ones are the Southwest Rift earthquakes right there. Let's see how much more I can make this so you guys can actually see it there, right? So there it is. And what I want you to note is the dates of this. 1981 is right here. So this activity begins late 1980-ish, but it really peaks in the beginning of 1981, where here we're reaching about 100 earthquakes per day-ish, right in there, right? So call that the start, just to make it easy, January of 1981. Look at how long these earthquakes persist. It goes all the way to here. And if we look at our time at our scale here below, let's scroll it up. That is pretty close. I believe that's August 10th, 1981. So you have from January to August, right? You had 8 months of flare-up southwest rift action all through here, right? And no eruption there. But you did have, at the end of that sequence there, let's see if I can, yeah, at the end of that sequence here, you have earthquakes on that southwest south flank area that kind of relieve that pressure in mid-82. And actually, if you keep going, I'm sorry, mid-81, right? If you keep going into 82, there is 82 right there. So before the turn of 82, they seem to start up slowly again, but once again, really flare up again at the beginning of 82. So call that January again. In this case, this goes until June, right? So really between 81 and 82, you had 8 months plus 6 months here. 14 months out of the 24, you had constant southwest rift zone injection intrusion with earthquakes going on the entire time. So if you're wondering how long this can go on, that is one way to inform it. It could go on for months and months and months and months and months and months, right? Up to, in this case, 8 right there, right? Now, what causes to change? I mentioned one of them here. Some of these earthquakes that can occur. These right here are earthquakes in that central south flank, similar to where we had our 5.1. And when that happens, and that in this case, in 81, facilitated that western part of the south flank to move as well, that relieved the injection and movement of that southwest rift zone activity. But when it came back up again, what then changed? Once again, movement of that southwest rift flank. And then finally, the one that actually ends it in late 82 is over here, where you have a combination of the pink, which is that southwest rift, and this green triangle is the upper east rift zone. So the upper east rift zone has a little bit of action in here, but really it's picking up in late 82, and this is when it actually switches back from the southwest rift to the east rift zone, was with that September 82 intrusion and summit eruption that occurred in that south part of the caldera, similar to where there's action now. So there's another way that it can end. It can actually cause some eruption in the upper east rift zone area, and then switch the plumbing underground to more easily direct the lava in that way. So that's why an eruption is still on the table as something that's possible, where it could switch around at any point and do that. We just don't know how far it can stretch. But we do know that in the past it has stretched for 8 or 6 months, or perhaps in other cases, other variations as well. You can note that throughout here, there's orange at the bottom. The Koaʻe is showing activity moving all throughout this whole area as well. In a greater context of things here, let me advance to this. This is a table of historic activity on Kilauea. So 2018, we know what happened there. Lava Lake and Hale-Ma'u, the pool era goes back to here. So this is what most people are familiar with of recent history. Going back further in time, it gets a little hazier in memory, right? So what we have here is if we go all the way back to 74, that's that southwest rift zone eruption. That's very near where the earthquakes are now. Right. So since then, the biggest event was this, November 29th, 75. There was a less than 1 day summit eruption, but the reason it wasn't the summit. It was at the time a magnitude 7.2 earthquake, since revised to magnitude 7.7. Massive earthquake that moved the south flank. And because it moved the south flank so much, then it led to a couple of east rift eruptions. In 77, Pu'ukia'i put lava right down a pali right above Kalapana. In 79, it was actually a Pauahi crater up essentially the Koaʻe area, Koaʻe Fault zone area, that erupted for less than a day there as well. Right, and then you have eruptions in 82 in the summit. Actually, the April 82 eruption site is very, very similar to what we see for September of this year. And then September of 82, that's the one that switched things over And that's what led to the history that most people know, the pool era and everything since there. And so that's a little bit of context there. I thought I could show you some more since we're at this. This is the Iris Interactive Earthquake Browser, and I thought we would do a live test here today. I've loaded earthquakes from 81 to 83, and I hope you can see the little blue dots as they pop up here. But this is, I've also, let's put it to all values. Let's make it, less than 10 kilometers to filter out the deep stuff. Okay, how many earthquakes we got? 8,000 here. And let's push the animate button, and let's let this thing play through. So there is our southwest rift. See, it goes all the way down to Pu'uko as well in 81. It actually connects all the way through at some point. You see the south flank flaring up. This is where we had that 5.1, same area that was moving back then. But in 82, what you see then is this area is what flares up next. And that's the beginning of that switch to the pool era at the very end there of the sequence. So one more time through, you see it begins up here, jumps to here. There's a final stage that connects them all with this line of earthquakes all between, right? That happens again. You see there's another patch that bursts through here. You note adjustments of Mauna Loa all across this flank as well throughout that similar time. And the south flank here in Kilauea is adjusting in similar ways too. The big difference being that at the time, that earthquake caused adjustments further down the slope, right? You have adjustments happening all the way to here in the 80s, whereas today we're only seeing it really in this upper zone as you see it illustrated here. So that's a little bit of a parallel back to the 1980 earthquake sequence there. I thought that would be interesting for some of you to see. And one last thing on that, what I've done here is gone to the USGS earthquake catalog and searched for earthquakes 4.4 and larger in that same 2-year window, right? So you can have a comparison of what were the big earthquakes in that era, what can we compare them to. If I list them by largest magnitude, the two biggest ones, there are two 5.6 earthquakes listed. This one, 11:52 a.m. and on the 21st of January 82, and about 45 minutes later, 12:30, another 5.6, and those are right here and right here. So one thing that can happen is you can have adjustments of Mauna Loa's flank as well with some slightly larger earthquakes. That seems like something to mention that could be on the table. There's a third one in this area. That's a 4.4, right? These are all at about 12 kilometers down, 9 kilometers down. So there's that. Moving in further this way, they have adjustments further east, as I mentioned. This one all the way south of present-day Pu'u'o was a 4.5. This one over here, 4.4. And here is as close where we had our 5.1. That was a 4.5 that they had at that time as well. Right? They also had some other funny stuff going on. Like here's one, 4.7, that's 28 kilometers down. This is a 4.9 at 30 kilometers down. So there was a suspected deep intrusion or deep movement happening below this whole area as well. This might be that deep pathway to Kilauea potentially. And the last one is 4.4 flank all the way over here. So as the magma injects the southwest rift and goes all the way down to here, you might move this piece of the flank as well. And that might be a big deal because it creates more space all the way up the pipeline, up and down. So just a little bit of context, none of this is predictive, of course. The situation was very different in 82 and 81 than it is now. But that's a little bit of extra twist and insight we can offer today for discussion as we think about what's happening now and consider the patterns that we're seeing over and over and over again here. So switching more formally to our monitoring now, we are going to once again look at the mounts system because there is another image that came out here. So let me pull that up here. Our most recent image on Kilauea looks like this. This is captured on the 11th of December for the previous 12 days, right? So it's really similar to the first 12 days of the month. And for reference, here's what it looked like the last interval of 2 weeks prior to that, last 2 weeks of November, and 2 before that. It was over here. So it's just showing how the center was in the southwest, and then it, moved to more in the center with a clear division right there. And the one we have to look at today does not show quite that division. You do see a continuity between that summit area and this southwest rift zone area all through there. Like there's, whenever this was captured, happened to capture some of that. The other thing that's different is this right here. This is that whole Koaʻe area right there. That's showing the speckled stuff in between is all the trees where it's harder to actually detect it. So this is a little bit noisy, right? But if you look at the previous image compared to this one, you might notice how that is just not there at all over here, right? So as we discuss intrusions into the Koaʻe and possible inflation there and movement and uplift in the Upper East Rift Connector, which is tracked by these craters over here, this might be a little bit of an insight. And of course, we're not specialists in reading INSAR. I'm just pointing out what is visibly different between these two snapshots, one to the other, right? And ideally, we get more input from the INSAR specialists at some point, right? But interesting to note these different patterns over time here, as this is one of the cool ways to monitor the volcano. So let's turn to the USGS update. We'll just look at today's update, since it's largely the same variations week after week now. The volcano is not erupting. Over the past day, there's been moderate seismicity. They are noting now in the summit region, Upper East Rift Zone, and Southwest Rift Zone, all by name. The same waxing and waning statement is in here. No unusual activity along the middle and lower sections of Kilauea's East Rift Zone. This is the important thing for people. No extra threat to people from the activity here. They do note slight increase of earthquakes since Tuesday. That's our most recent spike that came yesterday. 2 clusters south of the caldera, fairly small, not the same level as recent eruptions. They note changes of tilt meter, all of that. And they actually are putting a little extra explanation today. The Sand Hill tilt meter, located southwest of the caldera, has tracked northwest directed tilt since Monday. This is indicative of inflation to the south of Pele, the caldera, and it was a commonly observed signal in October, November of 2023. So they're noting that extra inflation there on that Sand Hill tilt meter as well. This one is one that they also keep repeating. The overall summit region remains at a high level of inflation. Relative tilts above the level reached prior to the most recent eruption in September 2023, and is any time higher than since 2018. So this is true, but you probably could have said this for a lot of other times as well, right? So the volcano is not perfectly elastic, where it's not snapping back to its old location. So you can't always compare how it was and what it took to break it the last time to what it takes now. And that's my issue with that statement in particular, right? So there are times when it does behave more elastically, where you can see, okay, it's reached the threshold. That means that it may actually be ready to do something. But we've again and again and again in recent years seen it exceed the threshold and exceed the threshold and exceed the threshold. And it just doesn't seem to be quite as relevant in a current configuration as far as what I have observed here. So that is the statement from the USGS, though. Still very inflated. Gas rates are still fairly low for the volcano, but still enough to impact people. Right? That's most of the information here. They are noting that they're monitoring the rift zones. Nothing at Pu'o'o ongoing, and that's the update for today. So to look at the actual data streams, let me come to the top here. And looking first at the 1 week interval period. Here is yesterday and then 1 week ago-ish. And all those in the shallow band in our depth versus 1 week of time plot here. And so there's the last week's flurry, and here's this week's flurry with that gap in between. And down deep in Bahala, there are also some pulses, but with no correlation to the surface that we can see here. Okay, tilt for the last week. This is Uikahuna tracking the Hale Mau source. And you see deflation, inflation, deflation, inflation, little ones, bigger ones. And overall, the pattern had been one more of inflation, but now it seems to be maybe slightly deflating. These are all just minor little wiggles, considering the scale is only about 5 microradians top to bottom, the entire thing. So pretty small wiggles here. We have added our 1 week GPS components here. So on our south caldera up signal. These don't quite line up. There's the 11th, for example. There's the 11th. Right? You might note that the low point in GPS, which is essentially averaging the whole previous day, like that, 10th to 11th, 10th to 11th, it was catching some of that low. So it does seem to catch a little bit of deflation inflation signals, right? But not all the little ones necessarily, as you see here. As far as the east-west signal at Byron's Ledge, similarly pushing east, there is a little variation in that as well. I'm just noting these little changes in case we want to use this at some point in the future to gauge on what might be happening more localized, right? So a slight deflation between those 2 days there on the summit. And maybe that shows up more on the east-west here, but it did not show up so much on the up and down. So interesting to note how different signals propagate across the semi-caldera there on this one-day GPS signal. The earthquakes we mentioned already, there is a map just to point out here, now that we've talked about it, how few of these earthquakes are happening down here at this end. There are a few, but really not many. Most of them popping in this upper 3 patches, right? 1, 2, 3 that seem to regularly flare off here. We still have the Deep Pahala earthquakes almost overlapping with these Pu'ukol earthquakes down here in the southwest. So that's why I like to see this one colored by depth, right? So these ones in that shallow surface where the magma may be injecting into the faults and causing movement and facilitation of that slip. But in the past, this is an area where that southwest rift does have a little bend, something like that. So it's been a place that earthquakes accumulate for many, many historical analogs here, and likely either the magma has made its way there and that's far enough because of that blockage, or it's being accommodated by everything upstream thus far as well, right? And note for now, we continue to have a gap between those lower earthquakes and the middle earthquakes in that southwest rift connector. So it doesn't seem to be moving this part in the same way, right? So that's still suspect about what's really happening down here, how much magma is directly influencing it, or if it's really, for example, potentially lubricating this fault line all through here, and this whole block moves, and that pulls this thing along, and it has to quake as well, and that's where it takes. Unclear. We'll have to wait for more of the experts. But here is our south flank continuing adjustments from this wedge that we've been pointing out all day, all week, all month. So moving on to the earthquakes for the last month, there is those 5 peaks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And what I want to point out here is, well, I'll come back to this, and we'll keep those for now. Don't really resolve too well in this depth time plot, but it does help to see where our 5-pointers and 4-pointers were in that context there. So for the summit, there is the whole last month up and down. Our tilt scale is more reasonable now. It's 18 microradians top to bottom. So all the little changes we saw were all these little wiggles here and there and there and there. So now you can more clearly see that over the past month, it's very clearly been, let's start from back over here, very clearly been a net inflation, despite the deflation inflation variations that have occurred ever since then. Right, so that's the key. Hale Ma'u is still inflating at the crater center there. That's like this blue line, and then we had extra from that south caldera area, as we mentioned in our summary today. So what I want to share now, well, let's look at this. This line comes up, and right there is where it breaks, and as we mentioned, right there is where the tilt changes. And if we scroll up to our earthquakes, right, that's where the earthquakes had just finished occurring. That the earthquakes relieved that tilt excursion. Let's go back in time to the last time this happened, right here. If you look at right there, that's the window. Let's scroll it up. Oh, look, there's the earthquakes once again. Pull it back one more time. All right, pull it back. That was that big earthquake. But really, here is the next break and graph right there, where it relieved that big inflation. Let's check it. Look, there is the earthquakes. So the pattern holds. We can keep going. Here is the next one back right there. There's the earthquakes. And that's the pattern that we have, right? So that's why I really suspect there's more interaction of the fault zone there. Not just, clearly it's intruding. Magma is clearly involved there. but there was some other fault priming going on here, given this feedback cycle that we're seeing here. So that seems fascinating to me, right? And maybe gives you an idea of how much longer this might go on if that's what's really happening there. Right? Okay, so further down the east rift zone, this is Pu'o'o. It's deflation. There is rain signal and earthquake in there, so it's a mess. Further down in Jonica, it's deflation. There's skewed graph because of the big earthquake shaking it a lot more than other stations, but still. Summit SO2 is low. As we mentioned, there is a whole last month of activity all put together. So you can more clearly see the whole zone that's being affected there. Upper East Rift, the 3 south flank patches. They're there and there. And actually, we do have a little bit more coming further off here, but not too far. And for anyone who's concerned, we will check into the Kalapana Tro station right around here and check in the rift zone and confirm the rift zone here is actually still contracting and being pinch closed. Right? So that's the real key thing is even if this does get reactivated and there's an eruption, it's right now constrained to this area like that more or less, right? In there. So, okay, that's mostly it for the last year. I just want to point out the earthquakes in GPS here. So earthquake counts now it's per week for the last year, but you can see that this is now the 3rd month of this intrusion crisis on the southwest of Kilauea, right? That's very different than what we saw prior to the last few eruptions here. Even this one was extended to maybe 8 weeks, 7-8 weeks, right? It's not the same as what we're seeing now. We're dealing with something a little different. It's something's a little changed, evolved, progressed. Right? On the GPS at the summit, the contraction, we are seeing still that expansion a little bit more now. We'll zoom it in on this very right-hand side here of that summit line, north and south. So it is expanding. The summit has been swelling. It wasn't always doing that. Here's a period where it was more flat, right? So now we're injecting both the southeast rift and filling it and the summit simultaneously. And that's still ongoing. And at Pu'o'o, the line is still contracting, and there is one of those confirmations for us that there's not as much to worry about there. But there is a station that I like to look at, the Kalapana Trail, and let me show you here. This is the last 10 years of Kalapana Trail on GPS. So it's the 2018 eruption happening right here. The Kalapana Trail is an area that, as a rift zone, accommodated lava would move to the south. So this is a whole pool era back in here. Here's 2018, right? And then actually after that, the rift zone was refilling still, and it got pushed to the south. Partly you can tell this not just from the movement south, but the up and down component here. The station is rising, and then there's the eruption happens. And after the eruption, it recharges by rising again. And the key was really in mid-2021 here, 2022, where this actually started moving back down and to the north, right? And that's the key, is that since that happened, the rift zone has been pinching closed, right? So if we see this change, and that's the big deal as far as it opening the rift zone again, that'll happen someday, but that's where it's hard to tell. If we go back to the 2 years now and look at the very, very rightmost signal circles right over here, and knowing that there's a caveat that these can be corrected because they're noisy, right? Our east-west signal, still moving east-west. Our north-south signal is kind of flat right there, right? It's been a little flat before, a little down, even moving slightly south, right? But you see that for the last 2 years, it has a little bit changed in character. Why was this not zoom? Okay, well, where it was more steady upwards, and then it starts having these wiggles. Having wiggles. So will it at some point turn and go back? That's really the key for anyone concerned about that, right? But if we can recall, if I can bring it back to what happened in the 80s, right? What it took was first intruding the Middle East rift zone at Pu'o'o, and it took a long, long time for it to get past that, make its way down past the Lower East rift zone. So the Middle East rift zone is still mostly uninhabited. All the area downhill there, it's largely been taken. Royal Gardens has taken Kalapana Kaimu areas have been affected as well. So that might be where you have the return of impact if it were to return, not as much the lowermost rift zone until we have further progression like we had, adding a whole summit lava lake, building it for 10 years, and then priming it to eventually erupt in 2018. It's still a long way to go. Even though there's a lot of uncertainty what might happen, we see the volcano adjusting and moving, all those blocks, magma injecting. Will it squeeze up somewhere? If it does, will that eruption last? That's what we can't really predict. And that's really the story on Kilauea here, over and over. And hopefully that added a little bit of different take to keep it fresh for you guys. Mauna Loa is going to be quicker because not much is happening there. Here's the last week in tilt. This is all the daily noise, weekly noise. Here is depth versus time. Here are those deep earthquakes occurring. One small one and 3 tiny ones over the past couple of days here. That's really it. It also felt the earthquake, jumped its tilt signal. But overall, it's pretty flat, very close to zero on both ends there. And here's our 1 month of depth versus time. So these were our last deep earthquakes almost a month ago. Big gap. Got one tiny one. And then here we go. A little cluster of them just now. Still very few earthquakes per day. 4, 5. Very little compared to this was actually that deep to shallow swarm under Mauna Loa that occurred last month. And even that is really tiny compared to what you saw a little over a year ago now. And this should have been saying Mauna Loa monitoring. There it is, Mauna Loa monitoring. And that is the Mauna Loa monitoring there. One last thing to point out on the GPS, you can see that the horizontal component north and south across Mauna Loa there is still very slowly expanding. It's still kind of going up, and sometimes it's kind of flat, but it's not going down anywhere. Maybe slightly there, but overall it's a pattern of expanding, and more clearly an up and down signal in the last couple of weeks, month or so here. The uplift has gone from a little bit more flat to a little bit more noticeable right there. So it's still inflating, still uplifting, maybe not spreading as much as swelling up, right? And remember, when its flank moves, it creates more space inside, and it can adjust, and that can adjust in several ways. It can adjust by having stuff from below rise up, or it can more slowly propagate through and sag at the top, right? Either way, causes some kind of adjustment and response there. That's Mauna Loa. And that is the volcano updates part. We do have a volcano watch, which does not want to load right now. What's going on here?
Always something.
Reload button.
Come on, browser. There you go.
There it is. Okay, so today's volcano watch, sniffing out stealthy gas escapes between Kilauea's eruptions. This is exciting for me to see. This is an article about CO2, actually. So the two graphs illustrate it pretty well, if you take in the caption as well. But what they've done is, let's look at the caption first. They're showing provisional CO2 concentrations from 2 proximate areas at Kilauea Summit, March to October 2023. So on here, these 2 bars, this is that June eruption and the September eruption that occurred, right? So remember, this is CO2, not SO2. SO2 is something that might only form within those upper few tens or hundreds of meters of magma coming to the surface, where CO2 is thought to come from a lot deeper, right? So what they note, though, is that's very tricky, because SO2, when you see SO2, you know it's from a volcano. There's not SO2 flying through the air regularly all the time. CO2, that's different. There is regular background CO2 everywhere, and the variations in background CO2 are big enough that they can completely mask the signal of the volcano as well. So what they're doing is they collaborated with Cascades Volcano Observatory scientists and devise a method to select certain times when you have particular wind speed and wind direction that you pick those measurements from your instrument and count those as your good data, because that's when you know you have your ideal conditions of the wind blowing the emission source straight at you, right? So if they do that kind of filter, the data is still noisy, but they can do weekly averages. And when they do that, that's what you come up with. The gray dots are the raw data. The red and blue points are the weekly averages. And this is CO2 parts per million, just concentration, right? And what you can see is there is an increase prior to the eruption and a decrease afterwards. Less noticeable there, but if you look at this one, between June and September, it was clearly going down, 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 down until, well, it's like late August. It starts going up, up, up. And maybe that's mid-August there, starts going up, and then in September it erupts, right? And here is what it's doing now, is going up again, right? So that would lead you to believe that it's also more magma coming into the system, getting ready to push out somewhere. So we know it's coming into the system for sure, but the question has always been now, how much can the volcano expand and stretch out to accommodate that magma without actually breaking to the surface? So southeastern Halemaʻumaʻu and western Halemaʻumaʻu, and you can see similar patterns there. And look at where we are in November right there. So pretty interesting to note that pattern there. So that's Volcano Watch. Pretty cool to note them take those advances. They have some more corrections to make. That's kind of preliminary. They say that the data is going to look a little bit better, a little bit more correlated once they do that. But the next step is to turn their concentration data into emission rates of CO2. So then you know that magma is not just rising, but how much magma is rising, right? By how much it's actually putting out. So great to see them advance with that and to hear about the challenges that exist. Clearly, it's not easy work there, and great job from the USGS there, and great job of them sharing with us what they're doing there, which is awesome as well too. So that is the Volcano Watch for this week. Let's see what else I have here. Just wanted to mention the National Park for a community corner here. Parts of the park have reopened, actually. So what remains closed is still the Nene at Uekahuna, the Mauna Iki Trail. We'll look at this again in just a second. And Mauna Loa Trail above Red Hill. That's been the case, but this is a new one. This is a refinement of what was closed before, Mauna Iki Trail. So let me show you what that means here on the park map, which looks like this. So previously, this is the Mauna Iki Trail right here, from there to there, and that's what's closed. Previously, the Ka'u Desert Trail over here was also closed. Ka'aha Trail was closed. This was all closed. So all that is open. All this down here is open. This is all it's closed, is this one trail right here. Right, so that's an update to the park. Check their conditions if you plan to go and check things out. As always, it's a busy time during the holidays, even if there's nothing erupting. The last thing to note, as I mentioned this before, the USGS has noted updates to their website. They have moved their Mauna Loa and Kilauea monitoring pages to their science content. This is hard for me to show you on here because I can try, but let's see. I got to make it small so the web page actually responds to show me the menu options, because it doesn't always do that. So
Maybe.
Give it here. Let's see if I can make this show up. Okay, there it is, right there at the bottom. There is this menu section right there. And here under science, that's where that stuff lives now. Right? Volcano monitoring there as well, hazards and stuff. So that's the last little bit to mention there. And with that, Dana, I'll pass it to you. Say your mahalos.
Yeah. Appreciate everybody that tuned in today. We rely on viewers like you to help, keep the wheels turning on this thing. We don't have an advertising budget, so the views or the likes, the subscriptions, and the shares, they all go a long ways to helping get this out there and seen by more people. We're always trying to get the good information spread as widely as we can, and there's plenty of bad information out there. So we appreciate all your help on that front. We also do take donations. Those would be on beachberry.org/donate. And that is where these are nonprofit. We are a nonprofit, so these are tax deductible donations, and you can see our EIN on there as well, just to make sure if you want to. But yeah, that's really the long and short of it. Don't have any donations, don't have any questions in the queue right now, so kind of can actually maybe end on time. Is that something that we do here?
Well, it's a special occasion.
Right.
Yeah, we could throw it to Lou. Lou, you got anything you want to join or ask? Toss in here? No, you good?
You good?
I think I'm good. There was just a 2.9 that came through down at Pahala. 2.9 magnitude, 21 kilometers deep, southeast of Pahala, just a few moments ago. That's about all I got.
Isn't there in the AGU talk one of them about the Pahala stuff?
Yes. So if you like a little bit of just the menu of what's been on, lots of Mauna Loa stuff on there. Pahala earthquakes are on there, so some preliminary results of that stuff. The AEM, the Airborne Electromagnetic Survey, when they flew the helicopter with that ring, those results are out. The MT results, they have some of those out as well. Some really cool images. I can't wait for them to actually show them. It's nothing that I can actually show anybody at this point until more of that gets published. But there's tons of that. There's still stuff going on about 2018. I saw this talks from about Fisher 17 still, right? And talks about collapse of the caldera is a big thing, right? Because it's not often that you get to see the same faults move over and over and over again in the same place and time, and it helps you understand how faults work just overall in general everywhere in the world, right? And they've comparing collapses of calderas from here to Galapagos to Iceland, where all of them, it's kind of figured out all as a suite. So there's all of that. I heard more about the SO2 camera finally, right? That thing's been deployed for a while, but they're having to calibrate it and make sure it's giving a real data. It's better at sometimes than others. It struggles when a plume is really intense. And it turns out that the field of view isn't really quite big enough. So like if it's pointing the wrong way, it doesn't quite catch it. So they're working on all that stuff out before they want to put it out public to make sure that when people see what the numbers are, they're real and not like some lower number or some higher number or something like that. Heard about that. There's, all kinds of stuff here. That's
roster. That's all most of the stuff we've been waiting on, really. Like if we've been waiting on something, it's probably at AGU right now getting talked about.
Yeah. And in a way that this stuff works is, they'll go through the data and they have like a first pass on it, and this stuff is kind of still being refined and it's all yet to be published, right? So they kind of get their feedback here, they iterate upon it, they improve it, then they publish it, then they have like an updated talk like next year kind of thing with kind of wrapping it together. That's often how it works. They'll update that or progress it, take another step forward with that. So some of the data is preliminary. Some of the stuff, like one of the things that's interesting about the MT, they're trying to use the long period magnetotelluric signal to look down into the mantle below the island. But what they find is there's a lot of noise, right? And they're like, where's this noise coming from? And they start slicing through the island. What they find is they think it's the interface between the salt water and the fresh water under the island is creating like a kind of reflection. And it's because it moves. It moves like how high it is and where it is. And the reason they can tell this is they actually had a thing deployed during Tropical Storm Calvin. And during Calvin noted the actual change of the noise signal propagating across the island as a storm surge came and hit the island. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff, not what you're looking for, but that came out of the data, right? If you look at the data of the MT, it shows a clear barrier on a lower east rift zone right at Leilani, right where the fissures were forced to the surface, right where that steaming occurs, right? That steam area is thought to have maybe created precipitation of like that same kind of white minerals you see scum on the surface of the crater floor now. It's filling all those cracks and stuff down the lower east rift. That might have been a barrier for the magma. It couldn't get any further, and that's why it popped to the surface in Leilani. That came out in MT, right? That's something that's got to be fairly new. That's doesn't show in a gravity data. There's lots of gravity data. Not only like surveys of gravity before each of these eruptions after the collapse of 2018, but they also have a continuous gravity. They've been working on this one also, monitoring gravity continuously as like a tilt meter. so that you can use it like a tilt meter to say, okay, now it's changing. It's going to erupt in the next 2 hours.
That'd be crazy. Yeah,
They
crazy.
have that, but they're once again, proof of concepting, putting it through its paces. But that's
get it out of
deployed.
beta. Yeah, get it out of beta.
Deployed, also deployed.
Right.
So, but still, at these talks, when they're among peers, they can put out this information and say, like, okay, well, we know that you guys are understanding this is all preliminary, that we're still working on this stuff. We're here to get feedback in some ways, to present where we are and to network. And if we have some way to collaborate or something to consider we haven't, that's your chance to really incorporate that, right? That's usually how that works. So quite a lot going on. I wasn't really planning to give a whole summary, but that's off the top of my head, the things.
Right. We'll have a lot to talk about going forward. Like a whole lot. And with Volcano Awareness Month, a lot of that will be talked about more, and we'll be able to cover it that way, and then pick up whatever we doesn't get covered afterwards. Essentially.
Right. And some of the stuff we'll follow up with. Like, for example, we at one point broadcast a committee meeting in Pahoa by USGS employee Carol Finn, right? She's the one talking about the AEM, right? She has a talk presenting as well, and she's one of the ones presenting this data, right? So,
cool.
It would be great to follow up with some of the other USGS staff at the mainland, like her perhaps, and maybe have them either present to us or share their graphics with us or something like that, so we can share that with you guys too, so you can see those cool scans that they have, right, before they're officially elsewhere to see.
Right.
So we'll see how much of that makes it into Volcano Awareness Month. Volcano Awareness Month is going to have a huge amount of content. It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be a busy month.
Yeah, but it's this past week AGU has already had more than they could imagine, because they're dealing with their peers and not with the public. And it's really lightning sessions, right? Every talk the scientist has is like 10 minutes long, so there's no time for fluff. It's just like bam, 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 bam. Okay, next. Okay, bam, bam, and that's how it goes all day, all week.
Right.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah.
Well, looks some exciting stuff to look forward to. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for that overview, Phil. I think that was, pretty good for just off the cuff being able to go back through, these things. But
I'm sure I forgot some stuff as well. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff, and a lot of stuff to take into account. Yeah, I won't divulge any more of the details of that, but that's what I can say off the top of my head there.
All right.
And so thanks Lou, thanks Dane. Lou's helping out in the back end here. Thanks everybody on chat there for being an active community supporting us, and
check out Two Pineapples on YouTube as well. They have that 22.6 monitoring, so you can check the seismic graphs and get the live views, and it's kind of like an integrated hub. Right, you can probably find most of the stuff out there if you really tried, but it's really easy just to go there to the stream and you just get all of it in one spot. So that's check out Two Pineapples. Thank you, Lou.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. So until next week, from H. Berry, he's Dan DuPont. I'm Philip Ong. Mr. Lou, Two Pineapples. Aloha, everybody.